I thought the worst day of my life ended when the flames went out. Turns out, that was just the start. Because sometimes, it's not what burns down that changes you, it's what you decide to build after. The fire took everything. It started with a fuse box and ended with sirens and smoke and the kind of silence you only hear after your life stops making sense. One moment I was standing in the kitchen of my modest one-bedroom, heating leftover chili and humming Springsteen, and the next, I was outside barefoot in the snow, watching flames chew through the roof like it owed them money. No warning. No time. Just a loud pop, a wall of heat, and then chaos. I lost my apartment, my savings, my laptop, phone, clothes, notebooks gone. I'd been a freelance designer, scraping by with just enough contract gigs to keep rent paid and ramen stocked. But without my tools, I was nothing. No backups, no insurance, just a burnt wallet, a smoke-choked throat, and a heart that refused to believe it was real. The landlord didn't even come out. Just stood behind the yellow tape, smoking a cigar like it wasn't his building melting down. And I swear, at some point, between the shivering and the smell of everything I owned turning to carbon, I decided I was done. But then something happened. A firefighter, young guy, tired eyes, handed me a blanket and said, "You okay?" I nodded, lied. He looked at me for a beat too long, then said, "You walked out with nothing, but you're still walking." Didn't hit me right then, but I wouldn't forget that line. I spent the next 2 nights in a 24-hour diner off Canal Street. Bought 1 cup of coffee and made it last for hours. Tried to sleep sitting up in a cracked booth under buzzing fluorescents. On the 3rd night, the waitress, a woman named Shelley with pink hair and a smoker's laugh, slipped me a muffin with my refill and said, "Pay me when you can." I didn't cry until I was in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror, smoke still in my hair. Eyes ringed like I'd gone a few rounds with fate and lost everyone. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a phone. But I had a name. My grandfather's. He used to run a little shop in a crumbling industrial park out in Belmont. Redline Fabrication. It had been closed for over a decade, but I remembered how he used to say, "If you know how to fix something, you're never useless." I figured if the place wasn't bulldozed yet, maybe I could find some tools. Maybe even shelter. Or just a place to sit that wasn't soaked in fryer grease and bad luck. So I walked. For miles in cheap sneakers with melted soles. The building was still there. Barely. Cinder block walls cracked like old knuckles. Windows busted. Roof sagging in one corner. But the door was still on its hinges, and the metal sign, faded and rusting, still read, "Redline." I forced the door open and stepped inside. Just thick enough to chew. Old machines hulking like metal dinosaurs in the dark. But it was dry. And it was mine. Kind of. I found a cot in the back room, his old one. Stiff and sunken, but better than diner vinyl. Curled up that night under an oily canvas tarp and listened to the wind whip through the cracks. And for the first time since the fire, I slept. Mornings at Redline weren't quiet. They were haunted. The way the light came in through the broken windows made the dust dance like it was remembering something. My grandfather's tools were still there, mostly rusted over or missing handles, but they were real. Physical. Not apps or files. Things that made things. I spent the first few days sweeping. Fixing what I could. Trying to make the place feel less like a tomb and more like a maybe. No electricity. No running water. But the roof held. The walls stood. I called that a win. The strange part was how it felt familiar. Like muscle memory kicked in, even though I hadn't held a welding torch since high school. He tried to teach me when I was a teenager, told me that working with metal was about listening, not forcing. That heat and pressure could turn anything solid into something new. I didn't get it then. I think I do now. By day 5, I'd rigged a car battery to power a single overhead bulb and a busted radio that played static more than music. I found a box of his old blueprints. Hand-sketched, labeled in pencil. Brackets. Pulleys. Frames. Things meant for bigger things. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I couldn't design websites or logos anymore, but maybe I could still build. I dragged one of the old grinders out to the center of the floor. Took it apart. Cleaned every piece with rags and solvent I borrowed. Stole from the gas station down the block. Got it running. Not pretty, but it turned. That little noise, the whir of a working motor, made something inside me shift. Like my ribcage had a gear in it, and it finally clicked into place. I made a chair. Just scrap metal welded together. Bent rebar and sheet steel with a cushion made from an old sleeping bag. But it was solid. Balanced. Ugly as hell. But mine. Shelley from the diner stopped by that afternoon. "How the hell do you find this place?" she asked. looking around like she expected something to explode. My grandfather owned it, I said. Back in the day. She lit a cigarette. Didn't ask if she could. Looks like hell. I nodded. Feels better than where I was. She looked at the chair. You make that? Yeah. She sat in it. Rocked once. This could sell. I laughed. To who? I know people, she said, exhaling smoke. Weird people. They love this handmade junk. She took a photo before I could stop her. Texted someone. Smiled. You ever think about building more? I shrugged. Don't have the money for materials. She raised an eyebrow. Then use trash. That night, I walked the alleys. Collected broken things. Bed frames, fan blades, a busted bicycle. Hauled it all back in a grocery cart that squealed like it was dying with every turn. Then I built a coffee table made from a dryer drum, a lamp from an old trumpet, a shelf using wrenches as brackets. The place started to look less like a ruin and more like a forge. The next week, Shelley brought a friend. Tall guy. Ponytail. Drove a Volvo with a cracked windshield and used words like industrial chic. He looked around and said, You selling? I said, maybe. He bought the lamp for $80. Cash. And just like that, I had a business. Sort of. By the end of the month, I'd sold 5 pieces. Didn't have a name for it, didn't have permits, didn't even have a phone. But I had repeat customers. People who liked that the stuff was weird and raw and made by hand. I called it Ash Works, a joke at first. Like I was the punchline of my own tragedy. But the name stuck. Because every piece I built carried some of that night in it. The fire. The silence. The weight of loss turned into weight you could sit on. Word of mouth is a weird thing. It doesn't trickle, it skips. One day, I was selling a chair to a guy named Mitch who said it would go great in his art bunker, and 2 days later, a woman in high heels and sunglasses knocked on the shop door with a business card and an accent that sounded like champagne. Her name was Dana. She ran a boutique gallery in the warehouse district, the kind with exposed brick and framed nothingness. She told me my work had presence, like it was angry and proud at the same time. I wasn't sure if that was good. I want to feature 3 pieces in a show, she said, walking around the shop like she already owned it. 1 week. Can you deliver? I didn't have 3 pieces. I had 1 half-welded bar stool and a growing pile of copper pipes I hadn't figured out yet. But I said yes. Because sometimes your only move is forward. I didn't sleep much that week. Burned through every fuse I could jerry-rig. Cut my thumb open twice. Accidentally welded my hoodie sleeve to a gear shaft and had to rip it off with pliers. But I made them. A bar stool built like a question mark. A mirror framed in chains and door hinges. And a coffee table with a cracked glass top that looked like it had been through a war. And maybe it had. The night of the show, I stood in a gallery corner trying not to sweat through my only decent shirt. The crowd was all wine glasses and buzzwords. I felt like a welder in a church. Then someone said it. You're the Ash Works guy? I nodded. He was tall. Broad shoulders. Hands that looked like they'd forgotten how to be soft. I'm Owen, he said. I run a nonprofit out in Eastbrook. We're converting an old warehouse into a community hub. Youth center, tech lab, maybe a cafe. We need furniture. Stuff that lasts. Stuff with soul. That last word made me flinch a little. What's your budget? I asked. He smiled. Not much. But we pay what we can. I shook his hand. Then I'll build you something that doesn't break. 3 days later, I toured the warehouse. It looked like Redline's older, meaner cousin. Water damage. Cracked floors. Rusted beams. But the kids hanging out on the front steps didn't care. They were laughing. Throwing a basketball against a busted dumpster. One of them called me Bossman. I built tables out of reclaimed scaffolding. Benches from old bleachers. A front desk made from the hood of a Chevy Impala that hadn't seen daylight since Bush was in office. Owen's team painted murals on the walls. Someone donated beanbags. It came together like a memory being built in reverse, messy, honest, alive. The local news ran a segment. Burned out artist rebuilds community from the ashes. I hated that title. But people started calling. Restaurants. Startup offices. A tattoo parlor in Midtown wanted a waiting room bench that looked like it survived a punk show and a hurricane. I said yes to all of it. Ashworks became more than a name. It was an echo. Of grit. Of failure turned into texture. Of second chances made from bent steel and busted wood. But not everyone liked the rise. It started with small stuff. Someone broke into the shop and smashed a few pieces. Didn't steal anything, just destruction. Then city inspectors showed up. Twice. asking about zoning and permits and fire codes. One of them dropped a name, Vance Adler. I knew that name. He owned a chain of modern industrial furniture stores across the metro area. Slick, mass-produced stuff that looked handcrafted until you saw the identical units in 5 showrooms. He'd offered to buy one of my pieces at the gallery opening. I'd said no. Then he offered to partner. Said I could be the face while his factories did the actual work. I told him I wasn't a mascot. He hadn't smiled when he left. Now he was sending wolves. I called a lawyer, a friend of Shelley's. He said, "You're not wrong to be paranoid. Adler's got a history of smothering competitors before they get oxygen." "But I'm nobody," I said. The lawyer shrugged. "That's what makes you dangerous. You're new, and people are paying attention." That night, I sat on the floor of Redline, staring at the space that had become my cathedral. The chair, the first one I built, still sat in the corner, a little rustier, still solid. And I realized something. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. And I wasn't going to lose. Not again. The first real gut punch came in the form of an email. Subject line, cease and desist. Sender, Adler Legal Group. I was halfway through building a custom staircase railing for a bookstore downtown, pipes bent to look like ivy vines, when the email popped up on the burner laptop I'd been gifted by a friend at the youth center. The message said I was infringing on design trademarks, using unsafe materials, and operating without proper licensure. It ended with a threat to pursue immediate legal action if Ashworks does not halt all operations within 10 business days. I stared at the screen so long I forgot to breathe. I didn't have a lawyer anymore. The pro bono guy Shelley introduced me to had moved to Philly. I didn't even have a filing cabinet, let alone a legal department. But I did have Owen. He read the letter, whistled low, and said, "Classic squeeze move. He's hoping you fold." "He's not wrong to try," I muttered. Owen sat me down and said, "Look, you're making noise. Good noise. Real noise. He doesn't want to compete. He wants to erase you before you learn how to fight." I was quiet for a long time. Maybe I should have just stayed small, I said finally. "Take cash, keep quiet, avoid headlines." He shook his head. "You don't build things that small. Even your damn bar stools are loud." That night, I found an old notebook my grandfather used to keep. It had notes from when he opened Redline, materials lists, job contacts, but also mantras. On the back page, written in ink so faded I had to squint to read it, were 5 words. Make it mean something. Always. The next morning, I marched into City Hall, waded through paperwork hell, filed for an LLC, applied for a vendor's license, met with a small biz consultant who looked at my receipts and said, "You're barely profitable, but incredibly visible, which means people think you're winning, which is half the battle." I launched a website that weekend, took photos of every piece I had left, posted my build process on social media. Shelley filmed me welding with her phone while standing on a milk crate, yelling "Get the sparks" like a director on a budget. It blew up. People shared the videos. Comments poured in. Requests. Support. Donations. Then came the envelope. No return address. Hand-delivered to the shop. Inside, a USB stick and a note that just said, "Know who you're really up against." I plugged it into the burner laptop with the paranoia of a man who's seen bad movies and worse. Inside were scanned documents. Dozens. Internal emails. Purchase orders. Memos from Vance Adler's design team to their overseas factories. They were copying me. Every piece I'd sold in the last 6 months, they'd mocked them up, tweaked the names, and scheduled production. Ashworks Bench became Ashline Modular Lounger. The materials were cheaper. The price was higher. The soul? Gone. And they were about to launch a new collection. Next month. My blood boiled. I didn't know who sent the USB, but I knew what to do with it. Shelley helped me craft a post. Just the facts. A timeline. Side-by-side photos of my builds next to Adler's knockoffs. A short video explaining how a no-name builder from a burned-down apartment was now getting swallowed whole by a giant pretending to be original. I hit post. Within hours, it trended. Not viral like cat videos or scandals, but real people saw it. Makers, artists, writers, builders, people who've had their work stolen and sold under someone else's name. Support rolled in like a tide. Hashtags. Boycotts. One local journalist reached out for an interview. Then another. By Monday, the story hit the morning news. Ashworks accuses Adler Designs of intellectual theft. I expected Adler to deny it. Instead, they buried the launch. Took everything offline. No comment. Then, 2 days later, a man in a charcoal suit showed up at the shop. Clean shoes. Face like a shark learning to smile. "Mr. Adler would like to make you an offer," he said. He slid a folder onto my workbench like it was poison he wanted me to drink. Inside, a contract. Buyout. 7 figures. No attribution. No ownership. No more Ash Works. They wanted the name, the designs, the workshop, everything. Just not me. "If you sign today," the man said, "you walk away rich." I stared at the paper. For a moment, I thought about it. Really thought. Then I walked over to the forge, grabbed a pair of tongs, lit the acetylene torch, and without saying a word, I burned the contract in front of him. He didn't flinch. Just nodded once, like he'd expected it. "Mr. Adler will be disappointed," he said. I looked him dead in the eye. Good. When he left, I went outside, stood in front of Redline and felt the wind on my face. I wasn't rich. I wasn't safe. But I was still mine. And I'd rather go broke building truth than live rich off a lie. The fallout came fast. After the post went public and the contract went up in smoke, Ashworks wasn't just a workshop anymore. It was a symbol of resistance, of creation, of the middle finger aimed squarely at everything fake, polished, mass-produced, and hollow. Orders poured in. Not from collectors or gallery types this time, but from teachers wanting library benches, veteran centers needing durable desks, women's shelters asking for something warm and real for their front rooms. And I said yes to every damn one. I stopped sleeping more than 4 hours at a time. My hands cracked from cold steel and too much work, but I didn't care. We were building again. The youth from Eastbrook started showing up without being asked. Some skipped class. Some skipped worse. I tried turning them away at first, told them it wasn't safe, wasn't legal, wasn't anything but duct tape and desperation pretending to be a studio. But one of them, a kid named Tay, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You built something from nothing. I want to learn that." So I bought gloves. Eye protection. Taught them what my grandfather taught me, how to cut without fear, weld without wasting, and build something that doesn't apologize for being ugly if it works beautifully. We called it Ash Works After Hours. Word spread again. This time faster. Local news turned into regional interest. A podcast called me the blue-collar Banksy. Another dubbed me the Forge Philosopher. I laughed when I read that one, mostly because I'd spilled hot slag on my foot that same morning and screamed a word I'm sure philosophers don't. Then came the invite. Email. High-res logo. Polite wording. "We cordially invite you to speak at the Future Maker Conference in Austin, Texas." I'd heard of it. Big names. Panels. Sponsorships. TED Talk energy with more flannel and craft beer. I didn't answer at first. Imposter syndrome hit hard. What was I going to say to a room full of CEOs, architects, and startup founders? But Owen said, "You already gave a speech when you lit that contract on fire. Now go say it into a microphone." So I went. First flight in years. I wore a suit jacket borrowed from a preacher and boots that still had sawdust in the treads. Stood in a glass tower that smelled like money and lavender and tried not to sweat through my shirt. They gave me 20 minutes. I didn't use notes. I just told the story. The fire. The chair. The vandalism. The offer. The rebuild. And what it means when the thing that tried to bury you accidentally becomes the reason you grow. I ended it with this. The difference between scrap and sculpture is what you believe it can be next. Silence. Then, like thunder warming up, applause. Not everyone clapped. A few in the front row looked like Adler interns. But it didn't matter. Afterward, a man in a tailored vest approached me. Mid-40s, confident in that quiet way. He said, "I'm with Elevon Ventures. We invest in regenerative design, community-based manufacturing. We think Ashworks is more than a shop. It could be a blueprint." I raised an eyebrow. "You want to franchise me?" He laughed. "No. I want to back you. Partners. Your control, our capital. You grow this your way. We just help it reach farther." For the first time, I didn't say yes. I said, "Show me the terms." He did. They were clean. Fair. No fine print. No demand for branding changes. Just belief. The kind of belief that comes with 0 interest rates and a dozen doors kicked open. Still, I needed time. I flew back home to Redline and walked through the shop like it was the first time again. Kids were welding bike racks for the neighborhood. Shelley was painting a giant phoenix on the wall behind the workbench. Tay was laughing, while grinding metal into sparks. And I realized something. This wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too. which meant if I took a step forward, it had to be for all of us. I signed the deal, not because I was chasing dollars, because I finally had the leverage to do it on my terms. Elevon Ventures gave us seed capital, enough to expand operations, upgrade tools, hire 3 full-time apprentices from the after-hours program, and set up a second space on the west side of town, Ashworks West. It wasn't glossy. It wasn't corporate. It was loud, hot, messy, and good. We didn't build factories. We built fire. People came to us for authenticity, not efficiency. We taught them that rust could be beautiful, that flaws told stories, and that furniture didn't need to match as long as it had meaning. The momentum was wildfire. We got profiled in Fast Company, then Dwell, then a segment on morning TV titled The Workshop That Rose from the Ashes. That old photo of me after the fire, barefoot, blanket wrapped, soot on my face, circulated again. This time, it wasn't a tragedy. It was origin. But then came the fracture. Tay had been working on a custom piece for a local youth poetry center, a reading chair shaped like a curled leaf, welded from salvaged bike frames. It was ambitious, risky, and full of him. He didn't ask for approval, just built it. The client hated it, said it looked hostile, aggressive. They wanted something soft, safe. Tay was crushed. I took him aside, told him not every piece was going to land. That art doesn't always translate. That rejection wasn't a wall, it was a tool. He nodded, but I saw it. The disappointment, the doubt, the second-guessing starting to rot the edges of his confidence. I told the client to keep the deposit and find another builder. Told Tay to finish the chair anyway and display it at Ashworks West. Let it speak to someone else, I said. Not everything we make is meant for the first person who sees it. But I could feel the shift, the weight of growing pains, of scale. The more people we reached, the more chances we had to miss. Then, out of nowhere, Vance Adler resurfaced. It started with whispers. His design company had folded. Investors pulled out. Rumors of embezzlement, offshore accounts, unpaid vendors. His name was poison in the design world. But I knew guys like him didn't disappear. They regrouped. Sure enough, one morning I got a call from an unknown number. "Logan," he said, calm, almost amused. "Congratulations on your little empire." I didn't answer. "I lost the battle," he continued. "But the market doesn't care about nobility. It cares about margins. You're big now. Big enough to bleed. Why are you calling?" "To warn you," he said. "The second you stop building with your hands and start signing purchase orders, you become me." Click. I stared at the phone for a long time. I wasn't scared. I was furious. Because I knew he was right. Success can rot your roots if you don't keep your boots in the dirt. That week, I shut down all expansion proposals. Paused hiring. Turned down a 6-figure contract with a hotel chain that wanted 200 identical Ashworks-inspired tables. Instead, I hosted an open shop night. No RSVP. No press. Just people. We welded side by side. Talked failure. Talked fire. I told them the story of my first chair again. How it wobbled. How it hurt my back to sit in. How I still kept it because it reminded me I'm not invincible. Tay unveiled the leaf chair that night. And someone offered to buy it. Didn't ask what it was. Didn't ask why it was shaped that way. Just said, "It makes me feel something. I want that in my space." He cried. Didn't hide it either. That moment reminded me why I started. Why I said no to the fire's silence and chose to rebuild. We weren't just crafting metal. We were crafting meaning. But just as I caught my breath, just as the dust settled, the real test came. A call from a man named Ellis from the Federal Urban Redevelopment Council. "We'd like to talk to you about Ashworks becoming a national model. Government-funded, education-based, replicable." He wanted to take Ashworks everywhere. And that terrified me. Because when something becomes a model, it stops being a story. It becomes a template. And I didn't know if Ashworks could survive that. The meeting with the federal guys happened in a gray building that smelled like bureaucracy and printer toner. Ellis was waiting in a crisp suit, flanked by 2 assistants who didn't speak, but wrote down everything like scribes at a trial. He started smooth. "We've followed your rise. It's remarkable, inspirational. The kind of program that could redefine vocational pipelines and creative rehabilitation in distressed communities." I listened. Then he said the phrase that pulled the pin. "Scalable identity." "What does that mean?" I asked. He smiled like a man pitching vitamins to someone bleeding out. "It means Ashworks has the potential to become a national brand. Imagine 300 workshops like yours, one in every major city. Unified structure, central distribution, a system. You be the face of it all, of course. Leadership. Legacy. Legacy. That word hit harder than I expected. I thought about my grandfather. About the blueprint he left behind, the silence of that first night on the cot, the sound of my heart trying to start again. And I realized they didn't want Ashworks. They wanted the idea of Ashworks. Stripped of risk, sanitized of soul. Something that could fit neatly into a PowerPoint. I looked Ellis in the eye and said, I didn't build this place to be copied. I built it to be felt. He blinked. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm not handing over the torch. He tried to push. Threw around numbers. Promised schools, warehouses, a foundation named after me. But it didn't matter. Ashworks couldn't live in fluorescent lighting and beige office spaces. It needed noise. Sparks. Grit. People who walked in broken and left proud. I walked out. Stepped into the cold air and called Tay. Start sketching, I said. We're going to build something permanent. He said, What do you mean? I mean a school. Right here. Ours. We bought the warehouse across the alley. The one that used to store glass bottles back in the 40s. Its bones were still strong. Its history messy. Just like us. We gutted it. Tore out mold and metal. Built from scratch. No contractors. No grants. Just community hands and firelight. By spring, the Ashworks Institute opened. We didn't call it a trade school. We called it a launch pad. Half of it was workbenches. The other half was desks. Welding next to poetry. CAD design next to sculpture. If you walked through the door with something to say, we handed you the tools to say it. We offered scholarships funded by our own sales. No red tape. No applications. Just stories. You wrote yours. We read them. That was the only entrance exam. Our first class had 13 students. One of them was Randall's niece. Another was a former Adler factory worker. Another had been homeless 6 months before. They built chairs that didn't match. And every one of them sold. The original Ashworks chair, the first one I ever made, still sits in the front of the new studio. Rusted, crooked, barely balanced. We keep it there to remind everyone, including me. Start where you are. Use what you have. Build like your life depends on it. Because sometimes it does. And sometimes, from fire and ruin, from ash and silence, something is born that can't be burned again. Something fireproof.